Namaste, everyone. Welcome to the Cārvāka podcast. This is your host, Kushalmehra. My guest today is Samyak Chakraborty from X Billion Labs. Samyak, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thank you, Kushal.
So, Samyak, before we get into the meat of the discussion, how about we start like this? Why don't you tell everybody a bit about yourself?
So I started my journey, my professional journey at the age of 16. I clearly remember this incident where my school was invited to attend a Model United Nations conference, which is where students assume the role of diplomats and debate on global issues. And my teacher said that you cannot participate because you don't qualify. I said, what does it mean? She said, you scored very poorly in history and civics and so on, so we can't let you go because you will be an embarrassment to the school. I am never the one to accept no for an answer. So I directly wrote to the Model UN organizers myself. And they said, sure, we'd love to have you participate. My father agreed to pay the fees of whatever they charged, some couple of thousand rupees to participate. So I went. Of course, my school was extremely shocked that how I could come on my own. But what I saw there, Kushal, is that it was at the Taj President, and these kids were in fancy suits, and the core of the topic was, global hunger, global human rights, but happening at the Taj, followed by a fancy banquet, and the children were from A-list schools. And I realized that while it's fine, it's everybody's right to debate and discuss. It's not that something is only for the rich or poor, but the middle income Indian youth, the low middle income youth, did not really get this exposure. And I think they could do a lot more with it than the peers that I was amongst, because they were just using this experience to as a certificate to go abroad for university. So one was that, and of course, the rebellion to my school. I started my own Model UN program called the Indian International Model United Nations. And it in the next 3 years grew on to become India's largest Model United Nation, with about 5,000 students that participated across the country. 50 Pakistani students came, and that was really the start of my journey. As I was doing that, I would meet a number of companies to sponsor because it was self-funded. And then they would ask me questions about, okay, how do young people buy products? What do they choose? How do they make their choice? And this is pre-Facebook, pre-Orkut, so there was not really any data on youth as a segment. So I got a business idea there. And my father was in advertising, so I always knew at the back of my mind about advertising, marketing, and so on. My mother was also from the media background, so said, I put two and two together and said, hey, why don't I kind of start a business idea to sell brands, how to market to youth? Because brand will ask me questions, because I'm very connected to youth, and I really met a diverse set of youth, right? We had students participating from all kinds of schools and colleges from across the country, so I had kind of mentally a broad spectrum of insights. So I used the advertising background I had to kind of structure what I was doing, and I started a youth marketing and communications consultancy, which then later went on to associate with the DDB Mudra Group, which is where we first met at the headquarters in Santa Cruz. And the advertising group that I became a part of gave me a lot of exposure to the world of packaging, media, content. And at that time, the whole digital game was starting. But somewhere along the way, I realized that I had started the Model UN to create awareness and action on social issues. And of course, life took a very different turn, made a lot of money, made a lot of fame. But somewhere I was feeling incomplete. And say in the Maslow's hierarchy, obviously my basic needs and all of that were more than taken care of. So I didn't really have to think about money or the next meal. Um, so I kind of somewhere along the way, and then as you also know, while I was at Mudra, I used to do projects like Operation Black Dot that motivated and informed young people to go and vote. And we actually tied up with the Election Commission to enable young college kids to make their voters ID right from colleges. I adopted a school in Dharavi. I'm not sure if you came or not, but during the Mudra days, I adopted a school in Dharavi. And also ran a mentoring program called the Green Batti Project that kind of connected under-resourced youth with mentors from educated backgrounds to enhance their employability. So I was doing all these projects on the side along with my youth marketing venture. And at some point, I realized that just selling cola and candy to youth is not going to satisfy my soul, because I used to seek more happiness in projects like the mentoring program, Operation Black Dot, or the Dharavi school that I adopted. So I kind of gave up my equity in the company, and I got a decent chunk of money, and I took a year or two. I developed that school further. I started a program to provide seed funding to the mothers of the students of the school so that they could start their own businesses and create like a positive loop of income. And I remember this one day clearly, where one kid came and said to me in the school that, Samik भैया स्कूल तो कर लेंगे, पर मेरा भैया भी स्कूल गया था, कॉलेज गया था, पर उसको नौकरी नहीं मिला. So that really struck me. And I said, तो क्या हुआ? He said, नहीं, आप सब बोलते हो कि अच्छा पढ़ो, अच्छा मार्क्स लाओ और तुमको अच्छा नौकरी मिल जाएगा, तो मेरा भाई को तो 2 साल से नहीं मिल रहा है, वो तो इंग्लिश भी अच्छा बोलता है. So that really hit a chord in my mind. And alongside, of course, the world of work was changing. Technology was coming in, processes were being digitized, the very new products and services were being invented. So I found that there is this huge gap between what the industry wants and what our system is preparing our youth for. And the focus was a lot on either it was two extremes. Either the focus was on get degrees and get qualified, or you learn your basic skills like carpentry and plumbing and so on. There was nothing in between that really prepared people for the new world of work. So that's where the idea of X Billion Skills Lab was born, where X is the future, billion is India's next billion people, and skills is of course skills for the India's next people. And labs, because it's a continuous process of discovery, it's not something that you can say you've solved the problem. So I made unemployability the vision of my life about 7 years ago, and ever since I have been experimenting with different ways of solving the problem and moving the needle of unemployability. One thing for certain is educating more is not the solution. Giving more skills may be a stopgap, but enhancing people's intelligence and exposure, I think, is a more sustained solution. Because as the world of work changes, as every day is uncertain, your intelligence and your brain is going to keep you relevant.
So
So that, in
let's
short, is my journey.
so let's break this down. So you used two words over here. One was unemployability or employability, however way we want to put it, and the second word was intelligence. Now let's unpack unemployability over here. So when you say people are by and large most of the people in India. So let me give a perspective to everybody who's going to be listening to the subject the first time. So a lot of time we have this thing, right? Even the current government or governments in the past keep emphasizing on skills, right? So why do they keep emphasizing on skills? Because the idea is that if you develop a particular set of skills, you become more employable. That means you're basically researching what is available in the market as of now, and then you are getting those skills, and you're getting into the market and hoping that you get a job. And obviously you have the old school Indian way, which has always been very rote learning oriented, as they say, bacha jata hai school mein, we just mug up things and we do. So what exactly are you talking about when you say making people employable or unemployability? Because I know your way of looking at this is not the same as the standard view, so I want you to explain that a little more.
I'll start with a simple analogy first. The difference between skills and intelligence is, so let's say you have driving skills, right? So I theoretically went to learn how to drive, but my parents and my entire family would never trust me with a car because I don't have the judgment of what speed to apply, when to turn, when not to turn, and so on, right? So let's say, so skills is the ability to drive, but the intelligence is the ability to have the judgment of speed and of direction and of the basic principles of aerodynamic to ensure that your car doesn't crash. So the problem is that not every qualified driver is good at driving, and Indian roads are a example of that. Like everybody has a license, but you also wonder how they got the license. And if I think only 2 out of 10 Indians would get a license in the West. Um, Very very safe estimate, right? So I think that would set the context of what my take on unemployability is that I need to not give you the license on how to drive or teach you how to drive. That's important, of course, but what's more important is giving you that judgment, that ability to navigate, which then becomes very very important and perhaps more important than just knowing how to drive. So unemployability can therefore be broken down into the following: one, the inability to serve the demands of the current world of work. And the current world of work demands people who can think on their own, think smartly, take decisions, be creative, versus just be able to parrot or refer to a manual that they've learned. The second aspect of unemployability is that how do you certify employability? So earlier, the certification of employability was you have a degree because you've gone to a college, and there was a time in the history of India when going to college was very difficult, and going to a good college was even more difficult. So if you came from a good college, it meant something. But today, getting into any college and getting a degree is not difficult. I mean, today I could get a Harvard degree online, right? Does that mean I'm as intelligent as somebody who had to toil and toil who went to Harvard 20 years ago? Perhaps not. So, what we also need to relook at is okay, today we need to redefine what certification means and develop a mechanism to create personal data or customized data, that instead of saying Kushal has a degree in management, it should say can Kushal manage teams? Does Kushal have the emotional intelligence to deal with clients? Does Kushal know how to negotiate? And so on. So I think unemployability is what you teach, what you expose people to, and how you certify that knowledge and that intelligence is, according to me, the solution to unemployability.
Yeah, but then let's go back to this, because when you and I were having this conversation online, you told me something very interesting, and I want you did mention it here, but I want you to expand on it. So what exactly do you think is the problem with our current system of external qualifications, like when we go to the university and we get a degree, or nowadays we have this new idea of skill development. So where do you think we fall short there? So what, according to you, are the shortcomings in that?
So, a couple of things. One, and this is not just as a country, but largely in the world, we live in nomenclature. So, when an employer sees that हाँ बंदे के पास डिग्री है, so employer thinks के हाँ अच्छा स्मार्ट होगा. If you go one level deeper and get into what people are learning, you will realize that that is not relevant for the world of work. So, I repeat, I think the fundamental problem is what is being taught, and therefore what is being certified in a very macro level is the problem. Number one. Number two, I really think that education has become, see, in industry is not a problem. See, capitalism does is very important. A lot of the things exist because of capitalism. I mean, we're able to connect online because capitalism exists. But the problem is, I think, the profession of teaching and the people who are teaching, they've become too transactional. Because at the end of the day, if the guru says ki I don't care, tum सीखो ना सीखो, exam do, degree लो, बाहर निकलो, is very dangerous. So if
Hmm.
you talk to a lot of teachers today, and I'm apologies to offend if any is listening, but if you talk to teachers today, they are also basically factory line managers. आओ करो जाओ. And I think the fundamental root cause of the problem is there, because I mean, if the mother does not anymore want to nurture the child, you are going to put very dangerous creatures out in the world. And I think the analogy is similar for education.
So that's a very good word you use. Teachers have become like factory line workers. So where do you think that factory line worker analogy comes? Like you were telling me something very interesting, that we took our education system is basically an adoption of the British Raj hangover. So you told me how we've come from the Nehruvian era.
No,
So
no,
what
no. So
exactly?
I'll go two steps beyond that. Sorry to interrupt you. I'll go two steps. I'll go two steps beyond that. So if you look at a classroom, okay, if you look at a concept of a classroom, what does it remind you of?
I honestly, personally, it just reminds me of torture.
So if you think, it is essentially a assembly line, right? You have children seated like assembly line,
Ah.
because so this is something I've read. I don't know how true it is, but it kind of makes sense to me that post-industrial revolution, and this is globally, this is not just India. First, we'll come to India in a bit, but so what happened is that when the industrial revolution came about, you needed people, you needed workers, you needed managers, you needed the different cogs and nuts and bolts, right, in the whole system. So the education system was designed to produce those nuts and bolts, because there would be this one manager, one owner who would do all the thinking, and
Hmm.
then you needed this structure to do all the doing. So the entire concept of education and schooling was to serve the industrial revolution post World War II globally. Now what happened is that same, because if you see, and again you probably know more than me, but if you see the core Indian schooling, or it was more in the Gurukul, Guru Shishya format. Now, not everybody went to Gurukul, but learning was given, was a more soulful and a more enriching and a more human thing than a very functional thing. Because if I meet people of my great grandparent generation, and I have met a few, there's a very different depth that they have to them. And if I meet myself and my peers, it's a depth क्या है समझ में नहीं आता है. So the root of a very industrial education system started in the post-industrial era. Now what happened is, of course, the British brought that along with them and many other things to India, because now that same industrial setup was to be done in this country. So they also needed people to work for the industry they were setting up, and the ones that they were enabling through Indian businesses. And then I think what happened is when India got independence, and I'm not here passing a judgment call, because when you're in that position only you know what's best. So I'm not going to critique Nehru. In fact, I think every prime minister has in his own way contributed significantly. But I think what Nehru did was he created these institutions that were very meant for the elites. So they said that education and good quality education is only meant for a certain segment of society, above certain segment of society. Maybe not deliberately, but the way it was structured was very hard for the ones at the bottom to qualify to go to an IIM or to go to those institutions. And I think somewhere for a long time we just carried forward that elite mindset to quality education. And by elite I don't just mean economic, it's actually more intellectual than economic, where a lot of things just remain in the realm of ideas, in the realm of thoughts. Nobody even questioned whether this book makes sense or not, whether what we are teaching makes sense or not. And I think that the seeds of the disaster of our education system was sown then, again not deliberately, it's just a function of time.
Yeah. So this is something that I have always found fascinating. So I'll give you an excerpt that I had read in Dr. Arvind Panagaria's book, where I think it was either the last chapter or the one before that, which was about education in India. And I think you can totally relate to it in terms of how our education system is actually not even delivering in its current format. So so you'll find this interesting. So what Dr. Panagaria did was he actually looked at the data of how many people have we managed to actually get degrees. So he was like, when it comes to basic terms, like, okay, सबको school में डाल दिया, सबको पढ़ा दिया, everybody has a basic degree now. There we have done reasonably well. But when we go to the next level, which is what you talk about, what is the output after your education? What are so the word I'm looking to use here very carefully is value addition. What kind of a value do you add to the society in terms of creativity or any kind of output? And when one of the measures Dr. Arvind Panagaria used was research papers and original research papers that are produced by a country. So the shocking stat there I found there was that when it comes to India in comparison to, let's say, America, China, and many other major nations in the world, was that on that particular pedestal, we hardly have any kind of research being produced in India. Like we woefully fall short in comparison to those two countries. Also in institutes of excellence, like top major schools or top major universities that are producing these students, that are producing major research papers and are creating original products and doing some innovation, we lack woefully there. So when I give you something like this, so what is your initial reaction as someone who is actually involved in making people more employable?
You know, if you think about it, Kushal, India as a nation has given the world gems of wisdom like Ayurveda, yoga, and even Kama Sutra. But if you look at in the last 20, 30, 40 years, what kind of innovation has India given to the world, right?
No.
And that is extremely, and I'll tell you why. It's not that India suddenly become dumb. India's intelligence has got locked, and the so much, I think, like coming back to the whole Western, the concept of what British brought, so much focus has been put on theory, so much focus has been put on intellectual jargonism. Like India was a country that kind of, did not enter into extremely high end debate and high end conversation. We were a country of action. We created things, we experimented, we took intellectual risks, we failed, which is the very essential part of creating any successful research. But today even those who create research papers is, भाई मेरे को PhD करना है, because PhD करके अच्छा नौकरी मिल जाएगा तो कुछ research paper लिख दिया. You're not doing the research with the intent of discovering, with the intent of taking the risks. So my answer to that is that the we need to, more than my answer, my solution to that is we need to move away from the realm of theory. We need to sometimes consciously detach and draw the line in the sand from known and comfort zones, and again take the leap of faith to create and discover. Like, I'll tell you something, it really pisses me off when, we have the Indian government has these conferences on artificial intelligence. It will have these papers on artificial intelligence. अरे भाई, पहला अपना खुद का इंटेलिजेंस सुधारो, नंबर वन. Number two is, what is India doing in artificial intelligence? What contribution have been made? In fact, our Vedas have actually spoken a lot about quantum mechanics far before its time, as I'm sure you know. Now all we're doing is we're just citing Western theories on these concepts, and just parroting them, which I think is not a root problem, but one of the symptoms of the problems of the system today. That your intelligence or your ability is based on how much you've read, is based on what you can cite, and how you can just use what exists to recreate, but not innovate and think first principles.
Yeah, so now, okay, now let's connect to the next part, and this is where I want to talk about you guys and your work at X Billion Labs. So we said, the title was Preparing the Indian Youth for the Future. So now let's talk about the future. So first, I want you to tell me, what do you think is the future? Because a lot of times the future scares the shit out of people, and I'll just give you a demographic of the people who listen to this podcast or watch it on YouTube. It's usually young kids. So a major chunk of people who actually are my viewers are basically 30 and below, who are looking to, for new avenues and looking to skill yourself. So when you talk about the future, so what do you envisage is the future? And then in the second part, in the follow up to that, what are we looking at specifically, and what is X Billion Labs doing in that area?
So I want to answer it slightly differently. I obviously don't know the future, and if anybody claims to know the future, is not to be heard, because you can't use past data to predict the future. Again, a lot of people, you'll ask scientists to predict things. They'll say, they'll go back, look at past data, and based on that they'll come up with some probability analysis and just yap something. The thing is, future is something that nobody knows, but the ability to train your mind to adapt to the future, to respond to the future, to conquer the future, is what the goal of X Billion Skills Lab is. So the ability, so let look at it like this, right? Let's just fast forward, look back February 30th. Nobody imagined lockdown. Nobody imagined what lockdown is going to do. Nobody thought that one little microscopic virus is going to hold the entire world by its collar. Because our youth, our systems, our political systems, social systems, and so on, educational systems, business systems, were not prepared to deal with something so uncertain, because we were so used to following the book, everybody was shocked. But the way the world is going, what is for certain is climate change, artificial intelligence, data, unemployability, automation is going to really change the shape and our very way of life, right? But how it is going to be, nobody knows. So, X Billion Skills Lab broad mission is to enhance and shape the intelligence of young India to be able to, as I said, adapt and embrace that future without letting it intimidate them and crushing them. Now, let me be more explicit. Nobody knows what jobs of the future will be. Everybody is saying tech, 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 but to take it to another extreme, um, there will be a time when artificial intelligence will code itself. So coders क्या करेंगे? Right? It's not a distant possibility. It is a very likely possibility. So, but it doesn't mean that humans will become entirely irrelevant. I don't believe the matrix, and I hope the matrix does not fall true. But let's assume it won't. So it is not like all humans will be irrelevant, but the meaning of relevance will change, right? So what we have done is we have made a prediction that no matter what the job role is, there are certain intelligences that will be used in the new world of work, namely creative intelligence, emotional intelligence, critical thinking, um, first principles thinking, the ability to storytell, because communication is very essential and a very innate thing to humans. The ability to be productive, the ability to be to collaborate with different teams, These are all the kind of functions that will keep you a deep generalist. So you could be a coder, you could be an accountant, you could be a factory owner like yourself, you could be a podcast manager like yourself. But these intelligences, when adapted and accustomed to the specific job that you have to do, will enhance your capability to do that job. For example, what's the difference? Let's take technology. What's the difference between an average coder and a coder who's at the top of Facebook? Why could Mark Zuckerberg do what he did and not his immediate peer who's probably learning the same thing? Because Mark had the ability to connect the dots in a way, both in the need of the program he was building and how he was building the program, than many others. Or why could Elon Musk build a rocket in a way that no qualified NASA scientist could? Because they have the ability to apply and juggle these intelligence in a way to create unique outcomes. And that is what Skills Lab is training its learners to do. So you could be a chartered accountant, but we will teach you how to apply emotional intelligence to go and patao income tax officers. You could be a very very qualified introvert scientist. We will teach you storytelling to go and pitch your idea to a venture capitalist, right? Because you as a scientist have no use if you don't get funding to go and convert your idea to an actual reality. Or very simply put, you could be a salesperson, and we will teach you how to use collaboration to collaborate with the research team, the tech team, to be able to enhance your proposition. And then what we do is, while we're teaching that, our system maps you on those parameters, where then you will see instead of a CV, you will see a what we call a workplace intelligence profile, which will say Kushal's ability to think things through. Kushal can connect the dots. Kushal's ability to manage workplace emotions. Kushal's ability to storytell to impress clients. Now that kind of data becomes extremely valuable to employers as well, because now they'll be able to distinguish. So if my job role as an employer, I need somebody who's great at storytelling, but I don't care if they're not good with collaboration. So now I can make the right hire, and that also distinguishes each candidate from the other, instead of one degree which everybody has.
Now that is very interesting. So let us dig deeper. So you say you have this basically it's like a chart that tracks the individual at on different parameters. So when but these are objective standards that you guys have or you guys are building at X Billion Labs. So how does one go about developing these objective standards? So how do you guys actually end up measuring it, and can you explain in a very tangible way
Yeah.
where you guys have experimented with this?
So the interesting thing is, they're not objective standards. So there is no question that you will be asked when there is a right or wrong. Because in the real world of work, there is no right or wrong. It is how you respond to that particular situation, knowing computing the facts of that particular scenario, right? So what we do is, you are learning through animated content, and that animated videos present different scenarios, different uses of the intelligence. Now a question will pop saying, Kushal, this is a fact. How will so Kushal, these are some facts, this is a situation. How would you respond to it? And there are four different ways, and each way is right in its own way, but one is more right than the other in the context of the particular situation. So for example, there would be a question which says, for example, you worked in a supply chain company for 3 years, and you spotted an opportunity to use AI to use AI to make the supply chain business more seamless. And there'll be three different ways of you doing it, and you have to pick one way, and that particular way will have a certain ranking. And then you will accumulate those numbers to create a profile at the end of the program, and you will not be marked. It will not say Kushal 76% emotional intelligence. It will just show color codings with a high, low, average, medium, because you can't really rank. 76% emotional intelligence is no different from 75, and it may not be any different from 82, right? They're just zones, and then they become data points for employees to ask further questions to then assess in person. So to summarize, the assessments are essentially not like an examination that you give at the end of the module. The platform talks to you and hears your opinion, hears your views, hears your strategy as you are learning, and then it provides you options, and then you pick the most suitable option that you think is apt for that particular question or problem or scenario posed to you.
All right, so let's put it this way. So if I was an employer, right? So I am owner of a company. I own a company that is involved in XYZ tasks. So how do you guys go about this? So it's usually the company that comes to you, and their employees go through these programs, or it's the other way around, that let's say I am an individual, I am at home, and I want to really test myself, and I want to see or develop certain skill sets, and I actually on my own account go and approach X Billion Live. So how does it actually work with you all?
So when it comes to the student side, we're obviously going to colleges and we are doing a lot of initiatives to see. First is that we have to create a mindset change, because I'll be very honest, and I wish I'd addressed this slightly earlier in the talk, that youth themselves are not very motivated or excited about building great careers. They just want great jobs. They don't want to necessarily, and I say they, I don't mean everyone, I mean a vast majority, because Netflix and Instagram and TikTok and Chingari now has made us so comfortable in this virtual world that we really don't want to succeed and be out there and doing great things in the real world. So one of the reasons why we are not seeing so much innovation in India is because also there is no motivation to innovate, because it's so easy to just follow set templates. So what we go is do we partner with colleges to first create a mindset change that, boss, in the future your intelligence will matter more than your qualification, and if you do not apply your intelligence in so and so manner, irrelevance is a sure shot conclusion to your professional career. And a little bit of fear, a little bit of incentive seems to be working in our favor and in general. And of course, COVID and the environment definitely gave us that push, which worked in our favor. Uh, on the other hand, actually, what's really interesting is employers don't need convincing, because they believe in the power of psychometric and cognitive data for hiring. So that's not really the challenge. The challenge, of course, remains is our data standing true to the actual performance of the candidate. So we've just about started that process. So I'm not going to lie and say, oh, we have 95% success. We are getting encouraging feedback, but it's a constant process of evolution. But we are the first ones to do this in non-tech roles. Most of the upskilling, if you see, is in either tech or for school. So either you have your upgrads of the world, or you have Vedantus and Byju's of the world that are focusing on schools. We have taken that sweet spot of working with non-tech college kids. So you could be a BCom graduate, a BA graduate, a BMS graduate, or you could be a chartered accountant. We are focusing on that audience, where though right now the only thing that they have is their technical learning. They don't really have anything that upskills them for the world of work. So that's where, and even employers need an accountant, employers will need an admin person, employer will need a project manager. And right now they were hiring those through degrees and through personal interviews, but our intermediate solution kind of is seeming to be convincing to them.
All right. So now I have a question, but I think somebody in the live chat has asked a very good question. So I just want to go ahead and ask you. So Brijesh Dubey says, how would be an effective method for what would be an effective method for rural skill development and employment, considering the lack of companies that provide real world perspectives to them? So I thought it makes a lot of sense. So I'll just take his question and ask this to you.
At the cost of sounding arrogant and pompous, we've already thought of that. And one of my not one of my co-founder, Gaurav Jain. He has worked for the Indian Railways before he joined, and we went to school together in Delhi. So he has a lot of grassroots experience in dealing with in training and dealing largely training and dealing with people from grassroots communities. I have had a lot of work. I've done a lot of work with organizations like SEVA, Self-Employed Women's Association, which has about 20 lakh women in rural areas. So both of us combined have a lot of insight into how and what the rural aspirations are, and you'll be very soon seeing an extension of our same product to for rural areas. The content, of course, will be in Hindi, Gujarati, Marathi, Telugu, and not only in the language but customized to their sensibilities. And because your Pradesh who asked is absolutely right, who tells them how the world of work is changing? Who gives them a mentor? So one of the features on our platform is each learner gets a mentor. So imagine a young girl or boy from a small village in Kathiawad, Gujarat, now has a mentor like you or me or Pradesh, and we are going to do that. Of course, one condition remains that they must have mobile phone access. Something I cannot really do anything about, but numbers are encouraging that people in the rural are being included in digital slowly. So yes, to answer the question, we're going to do it. How to do it? I'm not going to reveal all my trade secrets, but because a lot of research and work has happened at our end for that. But one thing I'll tell you, don't sit on the high horse when you deal with people from rural or under resourced communities, because one problem in education in general, I was just talking to somebody this afternoon. There is a Lutyens Delhi club in education also,
Yeah.
and that too, and not just as owners of institutes but professors. I'm not going to name obviously, but you talk to certain professors, you will feel like they are like the Lutyens Delhi that we have almost tried to eradicate. I think that you really need to, when you don't teach rural, you inspire, you talk, you converse, because they're also very scared, they are also extremely intimidated. If youth in Bombay is intimidated, imagine what youth in a small town in Tamil Nadu is thinking about right now. So you have to really teach them as one on one, and inspire confidence in them, make them feel comfortable. And that is the zone that we as Experience Skills Lab are going to go in.
Okay, so let me then go into a very specific niche area. You've already mentioned that you guys are building the platform in regional languages too, and I'll ask you why. I'm following up on that. In fact, we just had the NEP declared.
Yeah,
If you, I'm sure you're aware of that, and you and I were
yeah,
talking about it too. Now there are many good things, there are many bad things. Whatever. That's just government policy is always going to have the good and the bad. But
yeah,
even in
yeah.
the NEP, we had a very huge focus on regional languages and how we need to educate in regional language. But here's the problem, Samyak. So I want to know your opinion on this. So when it
Yeah.
comes to primary education, we still have curriculum and stuff written in our languages, but here's the fact of life, Samyak. When it comes to technical languages and technical skills, we just don't have any kind of material that is available for, let's say, standard 11 onwards, or let's say for bachelors or masters or for PhDs, and that's a major roadblock. So how do you think we as a country can solve this, or have you guys even given it a thought about curriculum development or development of literature when it comes to work in the future in X Billions Lab?
Yeah, of course. I mean, like I said, our current modules are all going to be built in Hindi, Gujarati, Marathi. That, of course, we are doing. And imagine one day, I do want to see a future where you could teach artificial intelligence in Hindi, if that's what you mean, or you could teach C++ or Python in Hindi or Gujarati or Marathi. Is it possible? Yes. Is it difficult? Very. Because I'll be very honest, even to convert a module on emotional intelligence in Hindi is giving us nightmares, because the context is very important. It's not just a literal translation. Context is very important. Intellectual levels are very important. So if you use the same way, same method and curriculum and pedagogy to teach those who teach in English, and from see, English means more urban exposed. It's not just English. English means slightly more exposed and largely urban. But now, if you say underexposed and extremely rural, then your pedagogy and your curriculum has to completely change. So it is very hard, and you don't have many people who are able to, and more importantly and worryingly are willing to, because it also won't immediately pay. It is far more rewarding to go work as an English curriculum designer than spend months and months in villages understanding the human behavior in rural areas and then create something for them.
All right. So again, I have to ask somebody because somebody heard this. So Ameya Vaikar says, can they volunteer for teaching for your startup, or whether they can join it in some way? Have you guys created an option for people?
So I'm very, I mean, it's very sad and unfortunate that my website is not live right now, because we're upgrading the website, because the new education policy said a lot of things that we have been doing. So I said I need to kind of leverage that. So the website is not a. So do you know Amaya personally? Uh,
No, I don't,
there's
but I'll ask Ameya to email me and I'll send
Yeah,
him
and then if
your
you can
contact
connect us,
details.
because we love volunteers, we want volunteers, and especially if you could help with the rural agenda, that would be fantastic.
All right, good. So Ameya, you just send me an
Maybe
email
I'll
at
send you my email right now. If somebody else is also interested, it is Samyak, SAMYAK, @xbillionlabs.com. Xbillionlabs.com. You could just reach out to me.
All right, guys, you heard the email ID. If you want to volunteer for X Billion Labs, you can contact him at samyak at xbillionlabs.com. So now, Samyak, let's go deeper. But here's my thing. And this is again, I feel like I'm gonna be hurting all the young kids who listen to me. But what I see, and even somebody I respect a lot, Mukul Bhai is also involved in the field of education, who's watching this live right now. He said, and he basically addressed you, and he says, but Samyak, the problem with young kids these days is that they don't want to be skilled. They just want to be getting the next degree and get a job. How do we change that
Yes.
mindset? How are you going to
So
convince the young kids?
see, Mukul Bhai is absolutely right, and I think I mentioned this slightly earlier that one of my biggest challenges is to convince college kids that boss, you need to leave the degree and think about enhancing your mind. And they are so consumed with their Netflix and Instagram and the TikToks of the world that is far more there's far more enticing use of your time than doing something like what I'm doing or whatever else, or reading a book. I mean, how many young people today read a book? I mean, look at that virtual library behind you. It will remain virtual only for most kids because they don't read a book. I know you read a lot. You've gifted me like 10 books, but that's a place that college kids are never going to find themselves in, a library. Um, See, I'll tell you, Mukul Bhai and everybody else listening, right? That what works for us is we are taking employers and very very reputed employers from reputed companies to these colleges, and they are talking to the kids saying, boss, unless you don't come to me and prove your intelligence to create outcomes, I'm not going to hire you. So that of course does work, but I think that the forces of nature also have to support this. See, COVID in a way did accelerate it because people got scared because they got laid over. A lot of people got shocked. अरे डिग्री है परफॉर्म कर रहे हैं फिर भी निकाल दिया नौकरी से. So forces of nature also have to help create that behavior change. Like today we are wearing masks only because we are scared of getting a disease. If 6 months ago somebody said wear mask and go, nobody's going to do it. We're going to laugh at people, right? So something has to happen, and I am being slightly destructive when I'm saying this, but something has to happen that really shows young people the perils of focusing too much on virtual entertainment content rather than virtual intelligent content.
Hmm. Okay, so we've hit the 40-minute mark, and I know we need to wrap things up. So, a couple of questions that I still want to ask. So, let's say today I was a young kid, and I
Yeah.
really am confused. So, I'm 19, 20. I've just finished my bachelor's degree, and I'm out there looking at the job market. I before I go get a master's degree or something of that sort, and I go on the X Billion Labs website. So, what am I actually looking at? Again, this question is very specific because, see, you, I'm trying to play the devil's advocate here. People, a lot of these things sound good, right? But when the rubber hits the road, right, things change very quickly. So, why should I, as a young kid, actually go and even bother to do this with X Billion Labs?
Let's split it in two parts. Why should you bother to do it at all? Whether with X billion labs or Y billion labs, why do you bother to do it at all? See, it's really a question young people need to ask themselves as to what do they want out of their life. So one of my in my building, my office building, the night watchman, he's about 28 year old, and by day he's a Swiggy delivery boy, and by night he sleeps, but apparently a security guard. And I was having this conversation with him last night because it was raining and I couldn't find a way back. And then we were talking. And he says, sir, and he's a graduate by the way. He has done engineering, firstly. He's done engineering. He said, sir, पर क्या करूंगा? मैं स्विगी करके मेरे को 25-30 हजार रुपये मिल जाता है. ये नौकरी का 10 हजार रुपये और मिलता है. 40 हजार में हो जाता है मेरा. मुझे और कुछ नहीं चाहिए. Right? Or the other extreme is there was a point when it was really easy to freelance as a designer, as a musician, as a photographer, and you would get by, and sometimes get more than by if you were really good at what you did. But times have changed, and it's very hard today. Talent does not equal to success. Talent does not equal to opportunity, and unless you don't accept it yourself, there's nothing anybody can do. And this Kushal is a very dangerous thing that I'm saying, because this essentially means that India's demographic dividend could potentially be a demographic disaster. Because 7 out of 10 people, young people, like Mukul Bhai also said, don't want to. See, if you don't want to, then whether X billion exists, doesn't exist, there's nothing no one can do.
Hmm.
Like, and that's a fact. I mean, let's look at it this way, right? It's an informal statistic I have. that the average attendance of Mumbai colleges is less than 50%.
Mm, that's pathetic.
We kind of introduce colleges. So colleges भी है पर तुम जाते नहीं हो, right? फिर अगर कॉलेज अच्छा है बुरा है फर्क नहीं पड़ता है, तुम जा ही नहीं रहे हो. And I've been to a good college, and Jai Hind College is supposedly a good college in Bombay, and the average attendance including mine was less than 50%. Excuse I give is I was running my company, but whatever.
Same here.
Yeah, right. So the willingness has to come from you. People like me, companies like me, individuals like me, medium like this podcast, at best can make you think. At best can use interesting medias and interesting creative devices to spark that fire. But if you are going to douse that fire by choosing to look at Instagram instead, and then that's that. And I'm really concerned about that for us as a nation, because I'll tell you something. For me as a company, X Billion Skills Lab, one of my biggest challenges is hiring. You know why? Is because we're paying market rates. We have a very credible set of investors. I know I have credibility. My co-founder has credibility. All of that. पीपल आर लाइक यार यहाँ पे काम बहुत करवाते हो तुम, यहाँ पे सोचना बहुत पड़ता है. So I'm building curriculum from scratch. So once we got this Harvard educated curriculum designer, right? And she said, yeah, so there are so many of these Daniel Goleman's emotional intelligence. We can just kind of teach that. I said पहली बात तो normal average college Bombay kid को पता नहीं होगा Daniel Goleman क्या emotional intelligence दूर छोड़ो. So and I said no, but we need to really understand the Indian workplace. We need to customize it, use Bollywood, use Indian sports. She's like, but why? Curriculums already exist. And she didn't take my job offer, even though I was willing to pay more than what she took actually. So people are saying that यहाँ पे सोचना बहुत पड़ता है. And that's the same problem with many of my other startup co-founders that you also know, my friends. And they're like, hey, people don't want to think, they don't want to work, they just want to get a job, they want to be able to replicate what they know, they want to outsource all decisions to their boss and just get their salary at the end of the month. So there's nothing, I'll be very honest, there's nothing you can do about it. What platforms like X Billion Labs can do is, if you are inherently motivated or you were latently motivated and my campaign came and sparked that fire in you, we will give shape to your intelligence. We will ensure that no situation, no scenario seems unfamiliar to you, because we won't, like we say in our in one of our papers that we are writing, we won't even teach you. See, usually you say you don't teach a man how to, you don't give man fish, you teach them how to fish. We're saying we won't even teach you how to fish. We will tell you there is a fishing rod, there is a bait, there is a lake, there's a water body, and the kind of bait, the kind of rod, the amount of time you have to configure based on the situation you're in, because every fishing situation in the real world of work will be different than the other. So what I promise you is I will give shape to your intelligence, and I will prepare it for absolutely any scenario that might occur in the Indian world of work. And I will help you demonstrate that intelligence and that ability to employers in a way that is unique from the other learner, because no two learners will have the same intelligence profile in X Billion Skills Lab. So I'm not giving you a certification. So you and I as learners won't have the same certificate Kushalmehra has done this course on emotional intelligence. It will say this is how Kushalmehra uses his emotional intelligence to solve problems at work, and there'll be a very, very interesting ranking that will be there.
Yeah. So one last question before we wrap things up, and I believe this is something that I don't think kids are actually realizing, and I keep listening and talking to them, and they're not realizing that, okay, the West is already going through that. Artificial intelligence, and you mentioned this before, is basically going to make millions of jobs in the West redundant. Like your good old cab driver, your good old bus driver, or your, they call it the truck, right? The goods truck. That's going to be redundant, to the extent that a lot of basic level programming is going to become redundant. And yes, India is not at that stage right now, because we are a relatively poor country, and we just, we don't need to get into the industrial age in a real sense. We are still in a very pre-industrial society kind of a range, and we have a 50-year window. So while we might still have a lot of scope in good old industrialized jobs, but suddenly, and we as a society are 27 years at the average age right now. But what worries me right now is, over the next 50 years, we're going to become a significantly older society. And a lot of these kids, by the time all the money runs out and all the opportunities run out, basically we're going to have millions of people who are completely unemployable. Samyak, how do you intend to convince these people? Oh bhai dhyan de de.
किसी ने मुझे बोला टेक दीपिका पादुकोण एंड शाहरुख खान एंड आस्क देम टू promote unemployability. I don't think that will work. As I said, Kushal, I can't convince him. No one can. Something has to happen. Something has to happen. For example, what will get people to, like our prime minister did Swachh Bharat. After the first 3 months हो गया Swachh Bharat, right? मतलब किसी के बोलने से नहीं होता है. In climate change, no matter how much Greta Thunberg goes and talks at the UN, until one city does not submerge in the world, people are not going to worry about climate change. So I think until, unfortunately, a massive uprising or a massive layoff or something like that happens, भारत का भारत का यूथ जागरूक पूरी तरह से नहीं होगा. I don't think that all our 500 million young people or so, that's our population said, all of them will suddenly get serious. What can happen, and what where X Billion Labs wants to play a role and many other shows, is we start creating pockets of success stories. So if in a community, say 200 300 kids went on an upward path because of something differently they did, 10 under them will get influenced and so on and so on. So there definitely is a hope. But at scale, a mass movement without a trigger, without a spark, I don't see it happening, very frankly speaking. No marketing campaign, no celebrity endorsement, no endorsement from Harvard, Cambridge professors is going to get young people excited. What could happen is, if one day, suddenly, since we are just talking at the end of a Friday night, if suddenly robots invaded Bombay and took up all the jobs, that's the time when you will see Biharis and Marathis unite and say, भाई पहले robot को भगाओ, and then robot को भगाने के लिए अक्कल बढ़ानी पड़ेगी.
I'm sorry. I agree on that one. I agree on that one. That's something I can work with. So okay, but I can't let you go from the podcast without सबको डरा दिया. अभी सबको थोड़ा hope देके जाना चाहिए. नहीं तो सब लोग बोलेंगे यार तुम लोग तो डरा दिए हमको.
Friday रात
So
को
tell me, yeah. So tell me, before we wrap things up, where do you see X Billion Labs in the next 5 to 10 years?
I think my team and I are not going to rest until we do not enhance the intelligence of at least 1 million people, and put 1 million people on an upward path in the next 5 years. I don't want to say two, I want to say five, because we want to be able to give attention. I am not a tech company. You can come and buy a course, like you can buy chocolate on Amazon. We actually want to take part in the growth journey of every learner. So our goal is 1 million people employable, and with enhanced intelligence over the next 5 years. We also want to do a lot of other side things, which is rural awareness, rural advocacy. So those things will also happen. But 1 million is our magic number.
I'm sure you'll achieve it. I've known you for a while. We've been friends for a while, and I know whenever you put your mind to something, you always kind of get it, and that's what I've always respected about you. And this is an amazing idea. And you know what, man? I wish you all the success, and I hope you create one more successful project like you've done so many times in your life. So once again, brother,
I must have your support and mentoring, because my last three projects you've been an integral part of. Whether we adopted a village together and we created employment for hundreds of women that you and I did together under the PM Adarsh Village program. So I hope to have your support and that of your listeners in the mission.
all right, you will always have my support, brother. You know that. So I'm sure. And you know what? I wish you all the best and all the success and happiness in
Thank
life.
you.
And once again, thanks
You
for
too.
coming on the podcast.
Thank
All
you.
right, guys, you know the drill. If you like what I'm doing over here, please subscribe to the podcast, like the video, share it. And if you want to get in touch with Samyak, you know his email ID. It's samyak at X Billion Labs. And I've also left the details of the website in the description of the podcast. If you want to check it out, you can go there, check it out. The website will be live in some time. So
Please.
just in a couple of days, just go there and check it out. By the time maybe you're going to be listening to this podcast some days down the line, I insist you guys check it out. You can connect to them, find out how you guys can work with X Billion Labs either as a volunteer or something like that. If you like what I'm doing over here, you know the drill. You can become a member on the YouTube channel. You can join Patreon. Obviously, I have another announcement today. Being when we are recording this podcast, is the 7th of August. From tomorrow, 8th of August, I'm starting a new thing which I call understanding and experiencing religion. And considering what has happened in the last few days, we are starting with the Ramayana. So if you guys are interested in understanding the Ramayana from a modern, pre-modern, post-modern perspective, just become a member, and I'll see you guys next time. Until then, namaste, take care, goodbye.